Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, the Viceroy of Verisimilitude, the Master of Fun and Wonder, Mr. Robert Meyer Burnett, here with another episode of Robservations, the show about something. This is episode 228, and you, my friends, you are the imagination connoisseurs, the members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community that make this show not only possible, but fun. You know who else makes this show possible? Lucky Tiger Men's grooming products for those men who want to look good and feel great. And if you go to their website at getluckytiger.com, you get lucky. And when you buy their products and you punch in PGS for Post-Geek Singularity, 20% off your order. I'm telling you, their operators are standing by. That's at getluckytiger.com. I think I would be remiss if I did not mention the great Aaron Eisenberg, who many of you know as Nog from Deep Space Nine. Aaron passed away after an illness yesterday at age 50, leaving behind 2 sons and a wife. I was very fond of Aaron. I was lucky back in the early aughts that Mark Altman and I and Max Grodenchik and Aaron traveled to Paris, where we were the guests at, from what I understand, was the very first Star Trek convention in Paris. That's right. And it was a very memorable time. I certainly had a lot of fun hanging out with those guys. They were hilarious. Aaron was such a nice guy. And, you know, over the years, I'd been at conventions. We'd been guests at conventions. We'd hung out and various other genre events. And of course, we always went back and forth on Twitter, but really hadn't talked to him in the last face-to-face in a while. I think I saw him, the last time I saw him was at Star Trek LV about 4 years ago. And we hung out then. He was just a terrific guy. And I know that he struggled. He had kidney issues and other health issues his whole life, but the guy was a warrior. It never let him, I never saw him without a smile on his face. And he certainly will be missed. And, you know, if you want to go back and watch something that he's in today, I would suggest watching the Deep Space Nine episode, It's Only a Paper Moon, which was one of his finest hours as the character of Nog. The story for that episode was actually written by the great Star Trek novelist and great novelist David Mack and John Ordover. They came up with the story for that episode, and it dealt with Nog's PTSD after losing a limb during the Dominion War. He's fantastic in that episode, and I think he was in around 40 episodes of Deep Space Nine. I'm not sure, but he was always a wondrous presence. And I remember the great thing about Aaron Eisenberg as Nog, and as people that are remembering him point out, is that when Nog first was introduced, I have to say he was a pretty annoying character. You know, and yet as Aaron took that character and made it his own, and because of his performance, the writers were able to always improve the material they gave him. His progression over the course of the series is really tremendous, and it stands certainly as a lasting legacy to him, both as a person and as an actor. And I'm sure anyone that ever met him at a convention or ever met him in person will have the same thing to say. He's just really a wonderful guy, and he will definitely be missed. And I'm sorry, 50 years old is too young to leave this mortal coil, but he goes into the final frontier. Hopefully he went boldly, and whatever awaits him there will be, well, it'll be full of fun and wonder. And of course, I don't know if I want verisimilitude in the afterlife. If there's an afterlife, I'd kind of want no verisimilitude. Just if there is one, something like that. That's what I would hope for, at least. So we remember Aaron Eisenberg today, and very sad. But for if you want an example of how to lead a good life, look no further than Mr. Eisenberg. He was truly a wonderful guy, and certainly he encompassed everything that Star Trek stands for. And I think what more can you ask for than that? Also, to move on from that, let's move on to better things. The Seahawks are currently playing against the New Orleans Saints. Last time I looked, it was 7-7. But I'm here talking to you. So we'll see what happens. It's kind of good because I can talk and I don't have to watch the commercials. Then I can just pop back in occasionally and give you a score. Well, anyway, the topic came. I got, again, you guys, I got a Willow Yang letter today, which is always a fun thing. She reviews the second season, the last episode of the second season of Next Generation, Shades of Grey. And for those of you, if Shades of Grey doesn't immediately ring a bell, it's a clip show. Because, of course, the second season of The Next Generation was plagued by the writers' strike. It was the first time that they actually resurrected a script from the aborted Star Trek Phase 2 television series, which was, of course, The Child, which opened season 2, because they were desperate because of what was going on. And Shades of Grey was Star Trek's really only clip show. Those are always... For those of you who don't know what a clip show is where they figure out some way where one of the main characters is suffering, whether it's amnesia, whether they're in a hospital, and you get to see, or somebody's remembering something, and they show clips from previous episodes. And it's a very cheap way to do an entire episode of TV. And Star Trek did it once, famously at the end of the second season of The Next Generation. And Willow reviewed it. Now, you know what? I didn't even look at Willow's review yet. I just know she sent it in because I take such delight in finding out what she has to say, and I like to read them live for you. Now, there's a topic that I certainly have been grappling with over the last half decade, and that is, well, who owns our franchises? Who owns Star Trek? Who owns Star Wars? Who owns Harry Potter? Who owns James Bond? At first glance, the question is pretty simple and it's academic. But I suppose there's an existential and a philosophical answer to that question as well. And, I never get tired of delving into that. And today I have another letter from, I've mispronounced his last name every single time I've said it. He's even corrected me, and even having his correction, I still mispronounce his last name every time I say it. But I'm going to say it again. Dean Macetich. Macetich? I always say Maistich, but I'm going to go with Dean Macetich today. Dean Macetich, a longtime imagination connoisseur, a longtime member of the Post-Geek Singularity, writes me and says this. Hi, Rob and the Post-Geek Singularity. I wanted to write a short letter. However, trying to get my point across, I had to add a little history to show my reasoning, but I will try and keep it as short as I can. The other day, I read an article asking if Star Trek Picard can heal the divide in the fan base. Personally, I hope it can, but the reality is that this show was created with Alex Kurtzman and the people behind Discovery. So I expect more of the same. However, this article stated that the fan base does not own Star Trek. This got me asking myself, is that really true for a big franchise? Sure, Viacom CBS owns the legal rights to Star Trek, but do they really own it? Without the fans, Trek, or any big franchise, is worthless. With Star Trek, it aired on TV and was up to be canceled after its second season, but a fan letter campaign saved it for one more season before finally being canceled. It then went into syndication, where its fan base grew and grew. As there was no new content coming out, the fans took it and appended themselves to create new content. This led to the first Star Trek convention in New York in 1972, with 3,000 people attending. By the third year in 74, 15,000 people attended, and 6,000 more were turned away at the door. All for a TV show that had not been made since the late 60s. Given the popularity of the show on syndication, Paramount commissioned a new animated series, which the fans ate up and wanted more. By the mid-70s, Paramount saw how popular Star Trek was and started to work on a new live-action show, Phase 2, that would bring back most of the original cast. It would go on to become the motion picture, followed by 3 more films. I should also interject here. There was also a feature film version that I talk about before the motion picture that was being developed called Star Trek Planet of the Titans. That's where the Discovery actually comes from. The design of Discovery we talked about yesterday was actually a repurposed design that Ralph McQuarrie came up with under production designer Ken Adam. It was in the mid-'80s. Paramount wanted a new Star Trek show, which would lead into what I call the golden age of Star Trek. We got Star Trek The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise, plus 7 more films, meaning that there was 719 episodes of Trek and 10 feature films, coming to roughly 32,375 hours of Star Trek. I think you're going a little crazy with that number. Plus all the merchandise, books, both fiction and non, toys, posters, clothing, etc. This was making Paramount a huge amount of money each year. Unfortunately, on the TV and film side, this all came to a halt in 2005. Trek was once again abandoned. Now, the one thing to keep in mind about Star Trek is that even though there were 7 TV shows and 10 films, they were all connected. Up to that time, there were no reboots, alternate universes, etc., spanning from the 60s to the mid-aughts, making Star Trek the first TV and cinematic universe, long before Marvel got into the game with the MCU. And if I might interject here, it did so following the Burnett axiom: do not put your universe before your characters and your story. At this point, Star Trek has had 40 years of fandom, with new fans coming in every decade in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And this has led to all these spin-offs and films. But without the fans, none of this would have happened. So, do the fans own Star Trek? In 2005, I would have said no. There was a symbiotic relationship between the rights owners, Paramount, and the fans. Paramount would make content that was true to the original ideals of the Gene Roddenberry show. They did not always get it right, but never strayed too far from what had come before, and that it no longer looked or sounded like Star Trek. The majority of the fan base loved what they were getting and were willing to spend money on it. Paramount was even letting fans submit scripts and ideas to the next generation. I'm sure that continued for DS9. I'm not sure if that continued for DS9 and others. It did for a while. 2007 is where everything changed. J.J. Abrams was brought on to make a new film that would appeal to the masses. The problem here is that J.J. had admitted he was not a Star Trek fan and did not really like or understand it, and was instead a Star Wars fan. The only thing J.J. did right was set the film in an alternate timeline. Therefore, his film would not be stepping on what had come before. But he also got rid of a core ingredient that made Star Trek great in the first place: the philosophical stories, instead replacing them with flash and bang, or Sturm and Drang. While the '09 film did well on the monetary side of things, its follow-up did not. Now, Star Trek '09, it did okay on the monetary side of things. It wasn't a runaway blockbuster success. The fan base is pretty much in agreement that the JJ films are bad and not good Star Trek films. Alex Kurtzman, the man behind writing JJ's first 2 films, was then placed in charge of a new Star Trek show and gave us more of what we got with the JJ films, or even worse. The fans pretty much hate Star Trek Discovery, and those that do like it tend to say it's good, but not proper Star Trek. Since Star Trek '09, any merchandise to do with the JJ films or the Star Trek Discovery TV show didn't do very well, or didn't sell at all, leading to barely any merchandise for them. However, classic and golden age Trek does sell very well. This brings me back to my original question: do fans own Star Trek? I would have to say yes, but only in part. The reason I say this is because it's fans watching and buying because it's the fans watching and buying Star Trek that keeps it going for the owners. With the content the owners are putting out at the moment, disrespecting what has come before and leaving out a core component of what made Trek good in the first place, is driving fans away and not really bringing in any new ones. Because of this, fans are unwilling to spend their hard-earned cash and therefore not making the owners any money. This means possibly no new content, which kills off the franchise for the owners. As for fans, they would carry on watching classic and golden age Trek and making their own content to keep it going in the fan community. So, as I said before, the ownership of a big franchise is a symbiotic state between the rights owners being the symbiote and the fans' host. Unfortunately, at the moment for the fans, the symbiote has changed into a parasite that needs to be killed or healed back into a symbiote. What do you and the Post-Geek Singularity think, Rob? Kind regards, Dean M. Well, first of all, the obvious answer is to say that, of course, the fans do not own Star Trek. They don't. CBS owns Star Trek. They own the copyrights. If Paramount wanted to make a movie up until 2005, well, it was one big happy fleet. Then the bifurcation happened, and Paramount had to go and get a license from CBS to make Star Trek movies. And now, of course, they're coming back together with the Viacom merger. They're coming back to the way they were in 2005. Now, what's very interesting is in the world of fandom, one of the things I find most interesting is these franchises, when they hit, have become a huge business. Star Trek was really the first of the franchises to really start doing big business. Star Wars was obviously the second. And when I mean big business, I mean there's a life beyond the media aspects of it, meaning the television shows or the movies. The merchandising, I mean, clearly, I read once that before, I want to say in the aughts, maybe it was around Revenge of the Sith, that Star Wars had made $22 billion in merchandising across the board. That's everything. That's a huge number. If you think about it, Star Wars was one movie that grew. Of course, it started out then as the trilogy. The Star Wars was just the trilogy up until, well, of course, there was the Ewok movies, there was the holiday Christmas special, there were various animated cartoons. Well, I guess all cartoons are animated. There was animated shows like Droids, things like that. And then there was, of course, the toys, the model kits, the prop replicas, the apparel, I mean, everything. And for whatever reason, Star Wars, as with Star Trek, existed. It wasn't just people. Star Trek. We saw this with Star Trek first. People were publishing fanzines. They were publishing magazines where they were writing articles about Star Trek. What did Star Trek mean? Trek magazine that put out their best of Trek anthologies. I mean, anthology after anthology. There was like 15. Maybe there was even more. Maybe there was 17. I don't remember exactly the right number. But there were these anthologies that were taken from a fanzine called Trek, the magazine for Star Trek fans, and then republished as books. I think Signet put them out. And it was just a collection of essays examining Star Trek. I mean, this kind of thing had never really happened before. Then, of course, there was fiction. There was filk songs. I mean, people were creating their own Star Trek, new Star Trek. The fans were actually creating new Star Trek. There were blueprints published of ships that you never even saw on screen. People were publishing. You could buy peel-off graphics. You could get I Grok Spock buttons. You could get model kits. You could get. I have a plushie Captain Kirk, Admiral Kirk from Star Trek: The Motion Picture. There was all kinds of things. And what happened was, and I know this happened certainly for me as a young kid, that Star Trek moved beyond just being a TV show to watch. It became, I like to say, whatever it germinated. The spore that was Star Trek germinated in my brain, within my imagination, and basically took over part of my consciousness, where it still resides today, a half century later. How does that happen? And does the corporation, and by the way, Paramount, it's changed hands. There have been other parent companies. It's changed hands. The actual people that owned official Star Trek has changed over the years. But Star Trek hasn't changed. I mean, in terms of how it lives in my brain. And as Dean points out, up through 2005, even the Berman era of Star Trek, which, let's remember, began with Gene Roddenberry and Rick Berman working on the beginnings of Star Trek The Next Generation together at the same time. Berman was brought over as he was an executive at Paramount, but he was brought over to work on specifically on Star Trek. And that became his job. And Rick Berman, after Gene Roddenberry left us in 1991, Rick Berman went on and produced a total of 25 seasons of Star Trek for 18 years. 25 seasons of Star Trek. That included 4 feature films: Generations, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis, and included the shows, of course, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, which he co-created, Voyager, which he co-created, and Enterprise, which he co-created. This is an amazing run of television. And as also Dean points out, Star Trek did have a shared universe. And I honestly think that was some of the appeal. And it was interesting because the new Star Trek shows spun out of, well, at least Deep Space Nine and Voyager spun out of the previous series. The whole premise of Voyager really had been set up in Next Generation, with and same with Deep Space Nine. You know, these seeds were planted, the Cardassians, Ensign Ro, Bajorans, that kind of thing. And then of course that moved on. Voyager, really, Nick Locarno, they didn't use his name, but the Next Generation episode, The First Duty, was where one of the main characters of Voyager was basically introduced. Same actor played him, but they had to call him something different, so they didn't have to pay for the rights of that character. But it's an interesting question. In this world where we have these multimedia franchises that are so beloved, that give us merchandising, that they let's face it, take up a lot of bandwidth in our brains, and they wouldn't exist. They wouldn't be franchises without their fan bases. And as I think Dean used the word symbiotic, there is a symbiotic relationship. The franchises only work if the fans are buying into the franchise. Now, what's really interesting is you can buy into the multinational corporations that own these franchises if you want. You can buy stock in Disney. You can go to shareholder meetings. You can talk about how Marvel is being handled. You can talk about how Star Wars is being handled. And what's really interesting is for all of the people that love Star Wars and I'll always bitch and moan and complain about everything, I always think to myself, well, why not buy stock in the parent company? Why not buy stock in Disney? And once you're a shareholder, go to shareholder meetings. You know, make your voice heard. Why just bitch on the internet? Why not really own? You can own a stake in your favorite franchise if you want. You can buy Disney stock. And you can bitch all you want about Star Wars. As a matter of fact, then your bitching and moaning and complaining becomes heard. If you're a stockholder, if you're a shareholder. I've always thought that's interesting. I mean, you know, if everybody who hated Last Jedi, instead of bitching on the internet, would get together and say, buy a big voting block of Disney stock and make their voice heard that way, that might be interesting. Can you imagine how interesting? I'd love to go to those shareholder meetings. But I think what Dean pointed out is, yes, there is a symbiotic relationship. The people that are making these things are being very well paid to do it. And I've seen a lot of other YouTubers. I know people that, again, I enjoy watching Doomcock. I really like watching Gary Beekler. I watch Midnight's Edge. I like everybody over there. Mahler, some of the Geeks and Gamers guys and girls and people. I mean, I watch a variety of fan-based YouTube channels covering a spectrum of different ideological bents because I like to be informed. And, you know, there's a lot of obviously vitriol on all sides. But the question does remain, if we do not like something about our franchises, we can vote. And I think there is something really interesting going on. As Dean pointed out, yes, many people who are fans, such as Ron Moore. Ron Moore got his start as a television writer by writing a spec script for TNG. and was able to, through a little ingenuity, get that script over on a slush pile that got read. He got called in for a meeting. He was pretty savvy about it. Not only was he a good writer, he knew the show, he had ideas, and he began his television career, which is cracking even to this day. He's got a new Apple show that's about ready to drop. Outlander was his. Of course, Battlestar Galactica is his. And if you believe, of course, our new showrunner, if you believe Sam Esmail, he's working within the mythology that Ron Moore helped shape for the new Battlestar Galactica series. It's going to be on the Universal Streaming Network. So there is a really good argument that could be made that franchises are best when there is a symbiotic relationship between the people that are the custodians, the current owners of the franchise, and the fan base. As a matter of fact, I mean, it would be I think the problem with that is many fans aren't exactly the best when it comes to giving corporate constructive feedback that can be utilized as examples of what they are dissatisfied with. But it's a very interesting, I think, existential question, because on the surface, they don't really care. The people that are here's what people don't understand, I think, about the creation of media as it exists in today's landscape, and that is when someone is hired to do a job. Okay, when you're hired to create a new Star Trek show, there are many contracts. There's a lot of negotiations. As I always say, you don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate. It ain't show friends, it's show business. So there is a lot of maneuvering and posturing and deal making that goes on when somebody is hired to take on a franchise, which has absolutely nothing at all to do with the content of the program that's being made. So Alex Kurtzman, as I've explained, and Dean pointed out, wrote 2 modern Star Trek movies. He wrote Star Trek 09 with Bob Orci and Star Trek Into Darkness. Now, when you make those deals in Hollywood, when those kinds of deals are signed, there's a lot of considerations in those deals. Those deals take into consideration merchandising, spin-offs, television spin-offs, all kinds of things. Now, I do not know what their contracts said. I don't know. But you can bet your bottom dollar when you go in, Star Trek was a successful television and film franchise. There were movies and television shows running concurrently, beginning in 89. In 1989, you had Star Trek: The Next Generation on the air, and Star Trek V: The Final Frontier was released. Of course, that didn't turn out that well for Star Trek V, but in 91, when Star Trek VI came out, in 94, when Generations came out, we had a television show that was airing and feature films being released concurrently in movie theaters. This was something new. We later saw that repeated, I want to say, in 98, when the first X-Files movie came out. This was something that was unique. Now, while it's not running now, we saw this weekend at the top of the box office chart in America this weekend, Downton Abbey rocked and rolled. It steamrolled over Rambo, and it steamrolled over Ad Astra to become the top grossing film of the weekend. The Downton Abbey feature made $33 million domestically. It's crushing it in the UK too. And for they know how to make that show. It's not exactly, aside from your talent, there's not a lot of special effects or CG that needs to be paid for. And the movie crushed it. So it really proved, Star Trek proved that, and now Star Wars to a certain extent, same thing. We're going to have a streaming show, The Mandalorian, and The Rise of Skywalker coming out in theaters right on the heels of The Mandalorian. So these franchises have become lucrative. So when you get to take over a franchise, your first job, the first thing you're doing before you even get into a writer's room is got to get paid, G. You are negotiating yourself a fat deal. Star Trek Discovery is one of the most, if not the most expensive episodic television show that has ever been made. I've heard Picard might even be more expensive. I don't know. I'm not privy to seeing those budgets, nor will I probably ever get to see those budgets, but very, very expensive. And everybody, with the amount of producers involved, everybody wants to take a slice. So the people that are working on these shows, especially the producers like Alex Kurtzman and his company Secret Hideout, the reason Bad Robot was so keen to take over Star Trek was because they saw dollar signs. It was a business decision. You get to take over a franchise and shape it into the way you want to make it. Well, what really the sad part is that, yeah, you had Bob Orci, one of the writers, who was a big Star Trek fan. Kurtzman wasn't. It was Bob Orci who was. The guy whose company, J.J. Abrams, was not a self-professed Star Trek fan. Can you imagine if somebody who was a Star Trek fan, who headed a company like Bad Robot, could have gone in and made a multi-pronged approach, working with people that were already at CBS, such as John Van Citters, and really gone in and taken over with an understanding of what the franchise really means to people, and have an understanding of the merchandising. I mean, Bad Robot came in there, and basically what they wanted to do was they only wanted their Star Trek to prevail. Well, that was the wrong-headed. You know, that you can't go in there and pretend it's that a fan base didn't exist. I mean, that wasn't a great move. And not only that, they had no plan. They didn't know what they wanted. They just knew they were going to create their own Star Trek. Let's go back to Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, but we're going to make it our way. As if Kirk, Spock, and McCoy that people had already loved for 40 plus years, that there was something wrong with that Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. We're going to update them and make them modern. Well, that could be great if you love Star Trek and have a great take on it. But they saw it as a business decision. The whole thing. We'll make video games, we'll make merchandising. But the problem with that is you're putting your universe before your stories and characters. I mean, what's really unfortunate, I think, what really would have been interesting is if you did what Star Trek was doing. It's funny, you look at what's happened now a little over a decade later. It's been a decade since Star Trek 09 came out. We've seen how successful a well-run cinematic universe can be. Actually, we've seen two examples of it. One is Harry Potter, and of course, you had the books to go from, which was there. But they've done a very good job synergistically doing Harry Potter over multiple films. Been on Broadway. You can go to Harry Potter Land. I can drive 10 minutes and step into Harry Potter Land at Universal if I want to. It's amazing. Well-run franchises completely take into consideration the fans. J.K. Rowling certainly did. She was dealing with her fans on a one-to-one basis when the books were being written and they were coming out. But it comes down to who owns the franchises. Well, the franchises wouldn't be franchises if they weren't popular. So the fans, in fact, are, the consumers. What I find really interesting about I think the most successful franchises, and whether you like Star Wars, it was very interesting. Lucasfilm was very fan friendly. They allowed fan films to get made. They provided rules. They know what their fans mean to them. Now, what happened with Star Wars, which is sort of interesting, is that because of the amount of money Disney shelled out to buy Star Wars, they're thinking the powers that be at Disney had no choice. They're like, well, we just spent $4 billion of shareholders' money. That was a huge risk. And Bob Iger, so what if he had to sacrifice John Carter, which he did. He did. I should do a whole show on my theory about John Carter. I've talked about it before. But so Disney got Star Wars, but they had to figure out a way to pay back that $4 billion. And what happened then is that Star Wars became a business proposition on a spreadsheet. They already thought Star Wars was wildly successful. It's one of the most successful, if not the most successful entertainment franchise in history. So the idea that it was a desirable crown jewel to buy was never in question. But once they bought it, it became only a commodity from Disney's perspective. Now, it's very funny because Disney, when it comes to Star Wars, Disney has we are all Star Wars fans. The world is a bunch of Star Wars fans. I've said this before, we are easy lays. We want Star Wars to have its way with us. We want to be ravished by Star Wars. You know what I'm saying? Ravished. We want our clothes stripped from our bodies, and we want the sensual pleasure of Star Wars to envelop us and take us to places we've never been before. That's what we want. We're waiting. We're waiting. You know, every time. I mean, my God, the whole world is waiting to have Star Wars have its way with us. So what's interesting about that is then Disney, from a business perspective, is sort of between a rock and a hard place because they have to mitigate their risk. They have to mitigate their risk. So you find someone like J.J. Abrams. Hey, Mission Impossible. Hey, Star Trek. Hey, a Super 8 movie. He could ape Spielberg. I didn't think well, but whatever. He becomes a safe hire. He can handle a $200 million budget, a lot of visual effects. Why not? Let's give it to him. Everyone likes him. Spielberg likes him. You know, everybody likes J.J. Abrams. Bad Robot's got all this great stuff on TV. He becomes the spreadsheet hire. You know, they can't go, why would you want to find a fan, you know, a Star Wars fan to come off and make this movie? And by the way, if you hired someone like Paul Thomas Anderson, who is a huge Star Wars fan, or a David Fincher, suddenly you can't control necessarily that kind of talent. That kind of talent's dangerous. Might be great talent to have. You might get an incredible film, certainly an interesting film, but you have to hire talent that then can work with a studio. But what's happened with that is that the studio and the talent aren't necessarily going to provide what the fans want because the studio doesn't know what the fans want. On a spreadsheet from a business perspective, they don't know. There's no guru who knows exactly. There's no Star Wars guru that knows what the fans want. And you could say, oh, well, what about Dave Filoni and the story group that creates Clone Wars? Well, yeah, they're talent that should be hired. They haven't made a feature film before. Dave Filoni's been doing animation. He has no track record. Can he deal with actors on a set? Can he take a crew of hundreds of people and muster the energy and lead those troops into battle? The battle of making their day every day? Can they do that? It's a whole different thing. So, and Star Trek, the same thing has now happened to Star Trek with CBS. Everybody wants that Marvel cheddar. They look at these shared universes. Let's go and do what they're doing over at Marvel. Let's turn Star Trek into that. See, what's happened is all franchises now are viewed as being the same because they essentially are. The Fast and the Furious franchise, hey, that's a franchise. 9 movies now. 10th one is in production. Who would have thought the Fast and the Furious is a franchise? Harry Potter, there's talk of them bringing another new Harry Potter movie back. Who wouldn't go see that? You bring back Daniel Radcliffe as Harry Potter. Emma Watson comes back, you know, Rupert Grint. You bring back Hermione Granger, you bring back Weasley, you bring back Harry Potter. Who's not going to go? Everybody's going to go. Ralph Fiennes isn't going to turn down, hey, Voldemort's coming back. How's that going to happen? Who cares? Sign on the dotted line. It ain't show friends, it's show business. Here's what we're negotiating for you. Everybody knows a Harry Potter movie is a very lucrative, it's $1 billion proposition at the box office. But again, the real question is, it comes down to then when studios are not giving fans what they want or providing the fans the material they deem necessarily worthy, the franchises are then damaged. They're not as lucrative because people aren't spending that kind of money. You know, they're not. It's very interesting. When I was a kid, I considered Spock, James T. Kirk, and Leonard McCoy my friends. And I've always believed that, look, I have my favorite movies, whether it's The Godfather. I like going to visit my friends, the Corleones. Mr. Corleone. I like that. You know, I go back and watch Goodfellas because I like Ray Liotta's gangster. I like Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now. He's a friend of mine. I know him. And we as fans, we watch this stuff over and over and over and over because these people, for whatever reason, they take over our imaginations. Whatever our favorite thing is. Downton Abbey certainly did. There's a whole generation. I mean, it's so funny reading everybody going, who would have thought that Downton Abbey was going to make a lot of money at the box office. I did. I said that on the John Campea show. It's not a surprise to me because everyone loves. I have never seen an episode of Downton Abbey, but I've watched people talk about Downton Abbey. I've seen what when people are telling me about Downton Abbey, real fans, I've seen what it looks like in their eyes. You know what it looks like? It looks like the same way Star Wars fans talk about Star Wars, the same way that Star Trek fans talk about Star Trek. I could have told you, I said, Downton Abbey, are you kidding? And look what they did. They promoted it by having fan events. Dress up as your favorite Downton Abbey character or a character that you would imagine would show up at Downton Abbey. And they catered to those. As a matter of fact, the people that they is it Focus? I think it's Focus. It's Focus Features, right? Downton Abbey. It's their biggest opening ever. They knew. You know, there's a savvy group of people. They're like, they weren't even in charge. They picked the movie up for distribution. They weren't in charge of making it. But everybody who made Downton Abbey was like, you can't make Downton Abbey without Maggie Smith. And they got her. I mean, Downton Abbey is like the ultimate fan service. And look at what happened. I mean, the Sex and the City movies, to a certain extent, are another example of they're not the best movies in the world. Downton Abbey, by all accounts, is actually a very good movie. The fans are really happy because there wasn't as much money involved because Downton Abbey doesn't cost $200 million to make. So it's no longer a spreadsheet effort. I mean, sure, money is involved. And yes, everybody wants to get paid and they want to have a profitable movie out there. But Downton Abbey was made because they knew they had a fan base and they knew they had an audience that wanted to see it. And so what did they do? They brought back all your favorites that they could get. And they made that movie. They made that movie specifically. They made the kind of movie that fans want. The funny thing to me about Star Trek 09, what I objected to is that I had spent 40 years from I wasn't born in 66, but watching Star Trek my whole life. I watched Kirk and Spock age over a long period of time. If you go in, you watch Unification from the 5th season of The Next Generation, what did they do for the anniversary of Star Trek? What did they do for the 25th anniversary? Was it the 25th anniversary? Yes, for the 25th anniversary of Star Trek. They made a two-parter where they brought back Spock. They brought back Leonard Nimoy playing Spock in the future. 100 years after the original series is in Next Generation time. He gets to meet Captain Picard along with his dad, Mark Leonard, playing Sarek. Not Sarek, but Sarek. How cool is that? Because they know. So when you tell me the first thing that we're going to go back and we're going to tell a story about young Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Why? You know, why do that? In a way, I get it. They were trying to create new fans. The idea is we are going to spend $200 million on this movie and another $100 million of marketing, which basically puts Star Trek 09 at $300 million. And Star Trek Into Darkness cost even more. And if you look at how much they made at the worldwide box office, because Star Trek does not travel well internationally, it never has, even though they tried to make it happen. If you look at how much money those movies cost with their marketing budgets and how much they made, they were not very successful. They should not have spent that much money on a Star Trek movie because no Star Trek movie had ever warranted that kind of money being spent. So this idea, when they were out of the gate, it became a spreadsheet. Star Trek was made, Star Trek 09 was made at a corporate level. It became a spreadsheet movie. It became it was not made, certainly not made by somebody who was a Star Trek fan, as J.J. Abrams said. It was a business decision across the board. You can never win. You can never win. If you're working with the franchise and you are trying to cater to a built-in fan base that you are counting on to come see the movie, you owe it to the fan base to make the movie that they want to see. Because that's what's kept, certainly the Downton Abbey people understood that. I think to a certain extent, even Chris Carter, when he made the first X-Files movie that coincidentally was directed by Rob Bowman, who directed Q Who, the second season of Next Gen. Rob Bowman went on to become one of the most valuable and MVP directors for X-Files. But I mean, you can't. So when it comes down, the question is, do fans own a franchise? Well, I think the real question is, to a certain extent, they own part of a franchise. And Dean is correct when he says that, yes, it is a symbiotic relationship because the fans are the people. Look, fans are going to show up anyway. All these people that talk about, well, I'm not going to go see the Rise of Skywalker because I hated Last Jedi. I'm like, fuck off. Yeah, you are. You just might not go opening night. If you're a Star Wars fan, as I am, you're going to go see Rise of Skywalker. You know, I can say that I really don't have the kind of enthusiasm. For me, I don't even need to see it necessarily opening night. It's funny, I'm more interested to see what they're going to do. I'm more dubious. Like, I've never gone into a Star Wars movie, ever. Hell, I didn't even go in the Ewok movie, The Caravan of Courage. I went into the both of Ewok movies wanting to love them. I'm like, cool, there's Ewok movies. You know, it's so funny to me. And again, what's really interesting is people blame Kathleen Kennedy. I don't. I think, as a matter of fact, you know, they tried to do the best they can. They've always, Kathleen Kennedy and Lucasfilm are trying to do the best they can. I think, in my own mind, I think they've really, without having seen anything other than, they haven't even shown you the scene that they showed at Celebration where the Mandalorian sits down and talks to Werner Herzog and has that conversation with him about taking this job. I watched that and I'm like, I'm in. And I think what's really interesting is they're finally getting, because the budgets are certainly, they're not nearly as much as movies, so there's a little bit more creative leeway. I think with The Mandalorian, we're finally going to see Disney Star Wars gel. At least that's my impression. We're finally going to see Disney Star Wars gel, and that's okay. I mean, I kind of look at where Star Wars is right now. I look at it as 70s Bond. You know, we got Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, Man with Golden Gun. And I know a lot of people say, I love Live and Let Die. Well, if you go back and you watch Man with Golden Gun, Live and Let Die, and Diamonds Are Forever, they're rough. They're rough, especially if you're a James Bond fan and you love the 60s movies. You know, Dr. No, From Russia with Love is probably the best distillation of Fleming's books. Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, On Her Majesty's Secret Service. That was a pretty great run of films. And if you're a Bond fan, you're like, all right. And then you get to Diamonds Are Forever, Man with Golden Gun, and Live and Let Die. Actually, it's Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, Man with Golden Gun. So there's three movies that are rough, not so good. And then, of course, Bond made a triumphant return, literally a triumphant widescreen return in 1977. So from 71 to 77, it was pretty bleak if you're a Bond fan. But in 77, kabam, Spy Who Loved Me shows up. Epic Bond on the big screen. Bond is once again on top. It had a great theme song. Nobody does it better. Makes me feel sad for the rest. You know, it's just a question of where we're at. But at the end of the day, these franchises, while I don't have a piece of paper that says I own Star Trek at all, and nor can I go to a shareholder meeting and tell anybody what they should do with Star Trek. They should think of, rather than make these spreadsheet movies, they should definitely take the interests of fans into consideration, because it's the fans that keep these franchises going. And indeed, they are franchises because of the fans. So how do you do that? Well, you got to do it very carefully, because there's not very many entertainment franchises like this. I mean, how many? 10, maybe, in the whole history of cinema? So how many franchises are even like this? So in a way, the obvious answer is no, fans have no say, or they don't own these franchises. But they kind of do in a certain way, because if the fan base went away, there wouldn't be franchises. So, as Dean pointed out in his letter, there is, in fact, a symbiotic relationship between the two. And it's very funny. There are other franchises, lesser franchises, like Alien, Predator, these things. And they have anything that has there's been novels, comics, there's other mediums where stories are being told. The Star Trek novel series. I have not understood why hell, they created the Vanguard series, the New Frontier series in Star Trek novels. They created ongoing novel series, both Vanguard and New Frontier, Peter David's New Frontier series, would have made an excellent show. If I was running the franchise, the first thing I would be is like, we already have 2 novel series that you could turn into Star Trek shows. Vanguard was concurrent to classic Star Trek, and if you had any, to me, another thing that wouldn't it have been cool if you actually, like, here's the funny thing. People talk about the fact that, do you want it to look like it looked like in the 60s? No. But as I've said, and I'll say it again, if you make a World War II movie and you make it now, or you make it back in the 90s, Steven Spielberg made Saving Private Ryan. If you look at the attack on Omaha Beach, Dog One, when Tom Hanks and his troops are landing on Normandy Beach at D-Day, the way the movie was shot, the filmmaking is very different than the way they made, say, my beloved World War II films, stuff like The Dirty Dozen, The Great Escape, Where Eagles Dare. They look different. Same war, but filmmaking has changed. Special effects technology has changed. Photographic technology has changed. You light things differently. Now, you can make things look redolent of the 60s. You could go back and you could use Star Trek designs are great, but you film it like it's new. You film it like it's modern. You could use the same sets. The lighting would be different. It would look different, but it would be the same sets. I mean, it would be really interesting to go back and make a modern. The funny thing to me is I don't understand why Star Trek Discovery, they wanted to call it canonical or whatever. Why not go back and embrace Star Trek's history? You use modern technology, modern visual effects, modern. Everything is modern, but you go back and you make it look. It's Star Trek is, after all, a period piece of the future. Why not go back and do that? But that would take a real creative leap. That's a risky thing to do. And it's Bad Robot did the same thing with Star Wars, and I guess it was their mandate. They had to make their own thing. Let's give C-3PO a red arm. Let's put a rectangle on the Millennium Falcon instead of a dish, because if we put a rectangle on it, then we can say it's ours, and whenever they sell a rectangular dished Millennium Falcon, we get a piece of that cheddar. We get some of that marketing dollar. We get to slide it in. Why use R2-D2 when we can create BB-8? I get it. They need to be able to make more characters and sell them. I understand. It makes sense to me. But again, if you're a fan of Star Wars and you've been watching Star Wars your whole life, when you find out at the end of Force Awakens that R2-D2 has literally spent that movie with a tarp over him in a corner, how does that service the fan base that has loved a franchise and has loved R2-D2 for 40 years? At the end of the day, and Force Awakens made $2 billion, so people are going to say, who cares? Doesn't matter. Well, I don't know. Does it matter? In the long run? I don't know. If fans aren't flocking, and I'm not negative. Like, I'm a person, I'm watching a lot of negativity about Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, for instance. I think that what they did with Star Wars Galaxy's Edge was pretty ingenious. They basically made Star Wars Galaxy's Edge a destination spot. Now, a lot of people said, it's not Star Wars, it's Disney Star Wars. But here's the thing. If you read Star Wars books or read Star Wars comics, it's something new. Batuu has its own mythology. When you go there, part of the experience, part of the immersive experience of going to a place in their philosophy of behind it, the Imagineering philosophy is, here's a place where the experience of it is actually new to Star Wars fandom. I mean, if Star Wars is going to move forward, and indeed it is, you got the prequel trilogy, of course, moved Star Wars forward. If you went to a place that you've already seen, no matter how immersive they made it, you're like, oh, I'm looking at Hoth, and I saw this in a movie. Well, Batu is your first experience with that part of the Star Wars universe. You get to actually go there. I think the mistake, and by the way, I have not yet gone to Galaxy's Edge, but I think the mistake that they made was there's not enough there. There's just not, it's too much. It's like an expensive Star Wars shopping mall. And it's interesting. I keep going back to when in 2012, I went to Montreal to Fantasia, the film festival, and we took Toy Masters, this documentary I worked on about He-Man, the He-Man franchise, there and screened it. While we were there, they had this amazing, it was amazing. It was called Star Wars Identities. And it was at the museum in Montreal. And you would go through and it had props, costumes. It was amazing. And then you were given a card, like a card. And at each attraction, and it was a museum, but it was beautifully done. I mean, I love this attraction. You would go through and you'd put your card in and you would make decisions like, would you do this or this? It was like, would you do a Jedi thing or a Sith thing? And you would go through the entire attraction. And then at the end, you would stick your card in and it would give you, it would display your character, and all the culmination of your decisions would tell you if you were a Sith Lord or what kind of a person you were. It was great. It was like the greatest attraction. You had to spend money to get in it. It was beautifully designed, beautifully laid out. It had all of these props and costume replicas. I mean, why isn't there a Star Wars museum like that in Galaxy's Edge, where it was a canonical museum, like they'd collected this stuff, like maybe there was some gangster who was a big fan of the Old Republic or something, whatever. You do some canonical reason why, and there's a Star Wars museum that you go through, and you actually get to see all this stuff. I mean, that's an attraction that was only at Galaxy's Edge. I know they're building a Star Wars museum, well, basically a Lucasfilm museum here, but there's not enough to do at Galaxy's Edge. There's not enough to experience. It's all just one big shopping thing with one ride, and we know that Rise of the Resistance is possibly delayed. But anyway, man, I've been talking about this for a long time. One letter. Ultimately, my thoughts on this are, I do think that the fans have a certain ownership in a property. And I think at their peril, do big corporations forget that that's true. And while the big corporations also forget the Burnett axiom, don't put your universe before your characters or your stories. They're forgetting that. If they think of fans as a synergistic part of business, rather than say, the fans will show up no matter what. Well, I think you do that at your peril. Anyway, I know there's been a lot of people firing in questions, but before I do that, before I get to the questions, oh my God, the Saints were in the third quarter. The Saints are ahead 20-7. Anyway, that's for the Seahawks game. Just thought I'd check in. Luke Beckett is here. Luke Beckett says, saw Rambo Last Blood yesterday. Hated it. In your words, it lacked verisimilitude. Did not believe a frame of it. Well, yeah. I haven't seen it yet. I do want to see it. I like the Rambo movies, but I have no reason to, after First Blood, First Blood, I think, is a wonderful film. It's a terrific action film. I love it, set in the Pacific Northwest, and it looks like it really indeed was shot in the Pacific Northwest. It's a beautiful movie. But this Rambo, is this the Die Hard, a good day to die hard of the franchise? I don't know. I'll go see it, but yeah, I've heard that. Mukbang Reviews is here. Mukbang Reviews says, Post-Geek Singularity Tithe, sponsored by the live chat. Mukbang Reviews, well, thank you for the support. I very much appreciate that. Factual Opinion says, favorite TNG Season 4 episode is Redemption Part 1. That's the last episode of the 4th season. That is when the Klingon Civil War breaks out. Great episode. I really like Redemption 1 and 2. And by the way, shameless plug, while you can get the Blu-rays of that, we did do a single disc only. So it's a single disc. It's like a movie version that has Redemption 1 and Redemption 2 sort of cut together as one 90-minute feature. If you get that Blu-ray, we did an extra documentary, and I did a great. I did a great doc. I had help, but I did a documentary. It's a half an hour long where we interviewed Robert O'Reilly as Gowron. We didn't interview him as Gowron. I just interviewed him, and it was great, which is cool. I love Redemption. I love how it was built up too. Willow Yang says, I'm 99.99% sure you're just trolling Dean Mysetich at this point with your mispronunciations. He's become like Benedict Cumberbatch. No, in a way, Dean Mysetich. It's funny. I don't know why I can't say that word, but it is. I'm not trolling him. I do it with love and affection. I just love when he writes in. It's great. And he's been here since early on. Kenneth Colton says, happy Sunday, RMB. I'm watching the Hawks game for you. I saw Ad Astra and was disappointed. For me, it felt like there was just something missing. Well, you know what? I haven't seen that either. I'm going to try and check it out tonight. I'm really excited to see it. But a lot of people have said that the science is off. If there's one thing I can't stand is watching space epics that have nonsensical science. Half of Interstellar was really cool, and the other half was just, what am I watching? And it's interesting because I read the original script for Interstellar, which is very different than what was shot. And I really was excited when I saw the movie. I'm like, what? Anyway, I don't like that. Yeah, I've heard that a lot, but I'm going to go see it anyway. Anything that has astronauts and in space, I'll go watch it. Alexander Wilson is here. Alexander Wilson says, when you say Hollywood hires the best person for the job, Daniel Alter would disagree. He talks all the time about Hollywood is filled with idiots. Well, here's the thing. I think what Daniel, there are, Alexander, that's a good point, but there are two very different Hollywoods. I'm sure there's subsets of those two things, but there are two very different Hollywoods. There are the actual filmmakers and the technicians that actually make the movies. And then there are all the people that get the money, get the projects, and get the people involved in making the movies. It's two very, very different areas. And in one, the people that aren't making the movies, the people that are trying to make the deals, the people that are the agents, and this is, look, agents have, their job is to provide representation for their clients, agents, managers, things like that. Those are people that are so far removed from the filmmaking process. And yet movie making is it's the one business on the planet Earth where everybody thinks they know how to do it. Everybody thinks they know how to do it. Everybody thinks they know how to make a movie. And it's really funny. The actual process of making movies is so removed and it's so different from the deal making that gets you to the floor of a set. It's as if you're in two different realms. And the problem is when you're dealing with the gatekeeper side of the business, the agents, the managers, the creative executives, all of those people, they are very, very, very difficult to deal with. And in my experience, that's where you come across all of the idiots. Now, there's a lot of great executives out there. There's a lot of really smart people. But if you're sitting in a room making decisions and taking meetings with writers and all those things, and you've never actually made a film before, and yet you're like everybody else. You've seen a movie, so you think you know how movies are made. There's a lot of idiots on that side of the business. On the other side of the business, yeah, there's some people that seep into the other side of the business that you have to deal with, of course. But for the most part, where I come from, where I live in independent production, as somebody who I'm a boots on the ground producer. I'm also a boots on the ground editor. You know, I'm literally making movies on multiple levels. I'm doing that right now. Tango Shalom, people poo-poo it. Yeah, it's a low-budget indie film. We've been dragging it, kicking and screaming into existence. And when a lot of people say it, they're going to be like, because it's not Endgame. You know, it's a nice film, as I like to say. Tango Shalom, the movie I'm working on now, is an indie Jewish spiritual quest family dance comedy fable. That's what it is. And it was made for not very much money. And I think it's a delightful movie. It was shot on the streets of New York, many locations. It looks more expensive than it is. I like the performances. It's truly indie. It is an independent film across the board, except everything that's put into it makes it not an indie movie. Certainly the amount of time we cut it, all of the elements in Tango Shalom are as far away from indie as you can get. I would put our production values up there next to any big budget film, any Hollywood rom-com or whatever. But there's going to be people that, because it's not, it's a very sweet, very traditional film, it'll get written off by all those gatekeeper people. They'll look at Tango Shalom and be like, it's not cool. But whatever, as a producer and as an editor and now as a post supervisor, I know how to make a movie. But I would still go in. If I just take Tango Shalom. Because I hadn't touched if I take Tango Shalom or other things I've worked on, I would be judged, and that's fine. All you can be judged by is the work that you've done, and there's nothing wrong with that. Hang on, I'm getting back in my screen. My screensaver cut in because I wasn't touching. There we go, and that's fine. But Daniel Alter is not wrong, and more movies have been killed in the deal making phase than are killed once you get past the deal making phase. I've been involved with so many projects that don't happen, that fall apart because of one area of Hollywood. I've been involved with very few projects that once you get boots on the ground and you're actually shooting, those projects get finished. Sometimes it takes years, but they get finished. Tiberius Monk, 84, says, I'm watching The Orville for the first time, and I'm in utter disbelief how this show is of much higher quality than official Star Trek. Wow. You know what? You know what I think is the big difference between Star Trek Discovery and The Orville? The characters. The characters in The Orville are people you want to hang out with. The characters in the original series. I would love to have been friends with Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, Scotty, Chekhov, Sulu, Uhura. I would love, even Kevin Riley. I would love to have hung out with the people on the Enterprise. I would love to have hung out on Deep Space Nine. Even Voyager, kicking it with the Voyager crew after the 4th season, so 7 of 9 was there. I don't like the characters on Discovery. I like Saru. He seems like he walked in from a whole nother place. I like Saru. It's like, okay, you seem like Anson Mount. Cool. But the rest of the characters, I'm like, I don't like these people. Why do I want to hang out with them? And I think even the storyline, the two seasons of Discovery stories they're not necessarily thought-provoking. They're I would call it bargain basement sci-fi writing. That's what it is. It was all bargain basement cliche sci-fi writing. There was nothing original about it. It's interesting. I watched The Expanse. I'm like, there's a lot of classical science fiction elements in The Expanse, but I like those characters. I like the situations. I like seeing the different points of view. It's just an interesting show about adults that I believe. But yeah, I think The Orville is you like those people. I mean, when it comes right down to it, I like the stories, but you like those people. You like hanging out with them. Cardinal Sin says, what we fans want is for Manny Cotto to be showrunner. Well, Cardinal, I don't know if that's necessarily true. It's really interesting. Michael Chabon wrote with his wife, Ayelet Wildman. I want to say Wildman, wrote an episode of Unbelievable, this show that I just finished binging on Netflix. It's an 8-episode cop thriller about these 2 female cops searching for a serial rapist. It's an incredible film. Oh, but I can't wait. I can't wait to read the think pieces about how all of them, it is the most, when I was watching it, I love the show. But Unbelievable, Lisa Cholodenko, if you know anything about her, she was directing many of the episodes. Susanna Grant, who wrote Aaron Brockovich, wrote the show. But man, I loved Unbelievable, but there's going to be the think pieces. Believe me, not a lot of people have watched Unbelievable because it just dropped and people haven't seen it. Wait, just you wait. There are going to be the think pieces about how that show is all about how all white men are evil. Terrible. Whether they're cops, it's funny, the one man on that show, other than a few of the I guess people would say emasculated husbands, even though they're not, is the black FBI agent. He's like, if there's a white savior trope on Unbelievable, there's a black savior. There's a magical black man in the guise of an FBI agent, who, by the way, is great in the show, but he comes in and saves the day. I mean, it is the most, as I was watching it, I'm like, it's a great show. By the way, I highly recommend it to everybody, but I cannot wait until people, maybe the audience won't ever get to it because they're too busy watching Last Jedi again. I don't know, but man, what a show that is. But it's going to be interesting to watch. Oh my God, the Saints are clobbering the Seahawks. 5 minutes left in the third quarter. It is 27-7. Seahawks are at home too. Wow. Anyway, I got more letters, people. I've got more letters. This one's quick. This letter cracked me up. I'm going to read it. This one comes from Craig Stratton. Craig says, "Hello, Rob. I feel I'm going to get hate for this message, but it's something that really bugs me. I hate popcorn in movie theaters." Now, I get that a little snack during a movie is okay, but why are the most common movie foods so noisy? I am tired of hearing people around me crunching on it. Popcorn is a noisy food to eat. It also makes a lot of mess. I get it's cheap to make and it makes the theaters their revenue, but surely there are better alternatives. Also, I'm just going to say popcorn tastes awful as well. Box sweets are good and often what I choose. Why not put more focus on them and provide more alternatives? Maybe even a few healthier options too. I know I might be the odd one out here, but ban popcorn from movies. Craig, I feel you. I don't like it when people smack their mouths like, drives me crazy. But you know what? I guess going to the movies, for being a lifelong moviegoer, the sound of popcorn, I just filter it out. I can't hear. What I can hear is cellophane crinkling, like Red Vines boxes or Sour Patch Kids. I can't stand the wrinkle. And people don't know, like I guess I've just developed it over the course of my lifetime. I have a certain set of skills, movie-going skills, where I can open a bag of Sour Patch Kids if that's what I'm eating, and I can stick my fingers in them and pick them up like this or something and not make a sound. You got to be like Zen when you're in the movies. The people that are making the least amount of noise in the movie theaters are the most adept movie watchers. You know who you are. You know what you're doing. But I love popcorn. I am not like John Campea. I do not put butter on my popcorn. I do put salt on my popcorn. And you know what? Having a little bit of chocolate to eat with salty popcorn, so good. My all-time favorite candy for movies is hot tamales. A lot of places don't carry hot tamales anymore, but when I was growing up, every single movie theater had hot tamales. I used to get accused as I got older that I only ate hot tamales because I was the only person that liked them. No, I'm a fiend for cinnamon candies. Farrappan's hot tamales, as everyone knows, my favorite candy of all time, is only from Bruce's Candy Kitchen. This is not to say that what Greg Smith sent me, he sent me a package of cinnamon saltwater taffy. It was delish, and I ate it all up. But my favorite, I don't know why this is, but cinnamon saltwater taffy from Bruce's Candy Kitchen in Cannon Beach, Oregon, is my favorite candy of all time. It is the crack cocaine. I should chop it up, but it's too sticky. You could never chop it up. Maybe if you froze it, you could break it up. You could hit it with a hammer. But it's my favorite candy of all time. By the way, I just heard that Bruce's Candy Kitchen has pumpkin spice saltwater taffy. Here's something else, ladies and gentlemen. Something else I'm very excited about. I don't know if I mentioned this before. October is coming. I don't know if you have Baskin and Robbins, 31 flavors, but my favorite ice cream of all time, my favorite ice cream of all time, bar none, Baskin and Robbins pumpkin pie ice cream. They only have it in October and November. That's it. It's the greatest ice cream of all. I grew up, it's because I grew up with Baskin Robbins. I'm not saying Baskin Robbins is the best ice cream in the world. I love all kinds of ice creams. I love gourmet ice creams. We have a gourmet ice cream place right up the street from us here. I love that. But having all the way back from the time I was a kid, pumpkin pie, Baskin Robbins ice cream, greatest ice cream ever. Other candies that I love, another candy that I love, but it's hard to find, jujubes. Jujubes. I love jujubes, but they got to be stale. I don't like new jujubes. Matter of fact, you always get, they got to be the hard, like you got to suck on them for a long time before you can even make them chewy. I love jujubes. Love jujubes. Jujubes and I guess the Farrah thing. I'll downshift to Mike and Ike's, you know. That's fine. Mike and Ike's fruity flavors, but you know, I don't know why I'm talking about this, but I love those things. And I like popcorn. Popcorn in movies is good. There's something about it. I can do it mindlessly. But I understand where you're coming from. You know, lips smacking and people making noises with their mouths. I have to tell you, for those who haven't seen it, you've got to watch. It's on the Criterion channel. I think it's Criterion put out a beautiful Blu-ray. If you haven't seen this, it's certainly one of my favorite Japanese movies. Juzo Atami's Tampopo, which means dandelion in Japanese. Tampopo. It is a noodle western. You got to watch it. There's a great moment about making noise in movie theaters. One of the greatest things ever. It's the opening scene of the movie. And if you haven't seen it, Tampopo is one of my favorite comedies. It's also one of my favorite Japanese films. I love it so much. And it's basically a movie about food, sex, and movies. Really. It's great. And it's a western. You got to see it. If you haven't seen Tampopo, you need to see it because it's awesome. Brandon Valenzuela says, what do you think about the rumors that Marvel is moving on from Brie Larson, which is the reason we didn't get a Captain Marvel 2 announcement? Are they? I mean, look, man, we haven't even we just got a Black Panther 2 announcement. We're not up there yet. I don't believe anything like that. Anything, by the way, anything to do with Brie Larson, and I don't believe it. Captain Marvel made $1 billion. It made $1 billion. I don't know if they're going to ever move on. You don't move on from an actress when you made $1 billion movie. I mean, the idea of fanboys disliking her or whatever. I mean, I don't see that happening. She's an Academy Award winning actress. I mean, maybe if people don't like her, but I don't know. I haven't heard anything to that effect. And until it's announced, I don't necessarily believe it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's what you've waited for. It's Miss Willow Yang, ladies and gentlemen, here with a review of Shades of Grey, the last episode of the curtailed season of Next Generation. Season 2 of Next Generation ended with Star Trek's one and only clip show, Shades of Grey. Take it away, Willow Yang. Greetings, Rob. Before I get on with my analyses of some of the better episodes from the Next Generation, I would just like to get this off my chest first. I want to talk about what is, in my opinion, the worst episode of the Star Trek franchise that I've seen thus far, and that is the Season 2 finale, Shades of Grey. Before I proceed, I will say this. I actually didn't mind the first 2 seasons of Next Generation. While the writing and stories often fell flat, I do like many of the characters and enjoy seeing their rapport on screen. Now let's talk about Shades of Grey. I do try my best to see the positives in every movie or TV show that I didn't like. I will say this about Shades of Grey. The episode didn't start off terribly. It seemed like it was going to be another mysterious infection story in the vein of The Naked Time or Operation Annihilate. I do quite like the character of Riker, and I enjoyed the quips he made. First with the story of his great-grandfather, and then at the end, his feigning of delusion. The latter scene was a bit puerile, but I still got a kick out of seeing Data's bewilderment when Picard, playing along with the joke, referred to him as Admiral. Unfortunately, once Riker had passed out, everything quickly nosedived into what felt like a sad attempt from the writers to stretch the paper-thin plot into a 45-minute-long episode. Well, Willow, that's exactly what it was. They had to do an episode. They had no money. They had to make a clip show. My main revulsion towards Shades of Grey isn't so much because they recycled footage from previous episodes in an overt attempt to save money, but because I felt there was just no thought put into the story. There wasn't any rationale behind the flashbacks that were being shown other than the flimsy excuse that Riker was experiencing emotions of lust or sadness. None of the incidents had any significant or meaning beyond that. Moreover, the way that memories played out didn't make any logical sense. Since we're supposed to be in Riker's mind, why don't we see things from his point of view? In the flashback to Skin of Evil, we were shown Riker disappearing into Armis's black goo from the perspective of the other crew members rather than from his. Similarly, in the clip from Justice, we see the Edo council chamber from the point before Riker had even stepped foot into the room, making it impossible to be something from his own personal memory. Why weren't there any flashbacks of Riker prior to joining the Enterprise? What about his past relationships with Troy? Why didn't that surface when he was feeling lust? What about the loss of his mother and his fallout with his father? That seems like something that should have come up when he was feeling sadness. The story, if you could even call it that, just felt extremely lazy and poorly thought out. While I realize that filmmaking is an extremely challenging endeavor that shouldn't be taken lightly, I do question the amount of effort that was actually put into this episode. And because Shades of Grey reflected back on the child, I would like to take a moment to discuss the season 2 premiere. I don't want to be overly sensitive, but the key plot point of the child really rubbed me the wrong way. A sentient life form entered into Troy and impregnated her, using her body for its own gains without any prior consent. I really disliked how the episode just brushed off this obvious violation of a person's body and depicted the entire experience as purely positive and joyous for the victim. The fact that none of the crew members, other than perhaps Worf, even raised the issue is exasperating for an intellectual and forward-thinking show like Star Trek, which was so far ahead of its time with regards to human rights, animal welfare, and artificial intelligence. The story was just a complete misfire for me. Even though I'm supposed to sympathize with Troy when she lost her child, the only thing that was going through my mind during the scene was, good riddance to that creepy demon kid. My least favorite episode of Star Trek thus far is The Dolphin. Now, if I have to make the choice between rewatching The Dolphin or Shades of Grey, I would watch the latter just because I can't stand Wesley. Seeing him on screen for me is the emotional equivalent of getting a splinter under my nail. However, I have to be honest, I believe that Shades of Grey is a worse episode than The Dolphin. The Dolphin at least tried to come up with an actual story, as dreadful and cringe-inducing as that story might be. Shades of Grey didn't even try. The episode actually reminded me of a group project I had in high school. We were given the task of creating a mock newspaper from the medieval era, with every member of the group responsible for making one political cartoon. Now, I have absolutely zero talent for drawing. It takes me hours just to create one, somewhat decent-looking panel. I'd managed to complete just half of my cartoon when my group leader demanded that I hand it to him. He was quite a keener and didn't want to leave things off for the last minute like most normal people do. Finally, having had enough of his constant badgering, I pretty much went, fuck it, and just scribbled something down for the remaining half of the cartoon. The result can probably be compared to Two-Face. On one side, you have a picture that, while not very good, were at least drawn and colored with effort and care, whilst on the other side, you have a crude mess that's clearly done last minute with zero thought put into it. And that is, unfortunately, how I felt about Shades of Grey. It really seemed as if the people making the episode just gave up halfway through and decided to slap something together because handing in something is at least better than handing in nothing. And the result is the worst episode of Star Trek, possibly of any TV show, that I've had the misfortune of sitting through. Until next time, Willow Yang. Well, Willow, you certainly nailed that one. Look, it was a Band-Aid, definitely a Band-Aid. Season 2 was, by all accounts, a disaster. Not that there aren't great episodes of, the Moriarty episode, the Sherlock Holmes episode, Elementary, Dear Data, good episode. Q-Who, good episode. There's some good stuff in the second season of Next Gen, but The Child, the season 2 opener, that was a recycled script, indeed, from the aborted Star Trek Phase 2 television series. There was another one. There was another one called Devil's Due that you'll see in the 4th season. That's another recycled script. And Star Trek New Voyages used Katoomba, another script, a Klingon script that could have been actually quite good. But yes, Shades of Grey is a shameful exercise in having no more money left and doing what they can to make the best of a bad situation. It's a horrific episode of Star Trek. I agree with you. But then again, The Dolphin isn't very good either. So I love that you brought those up. I promise you, from season 3 on, you're in for a much better experience, and you have finally arrived at where Star Trek The Next Generation really starts to take off. And I think your feelings, now that you've gotten through the first 2 seasons, which were very challenged, rotating writers' rooms and things like that, it only gets better from here, I promise. But what a great letter. I loved that letter. Thank you, Willow. Your letters always make my day. As the Saints are pummeling the Seahawks, it's nice to have read your letter. Oh, you know what? I didn't even finish talking about Cardinal Sin, Manny Cotto being the Star Trek showrunner. I forgot. By the way, sorry, Cardinal Sin. I forgot. I completely lost the trust. So for those of you who don't know, Manny Cotto is a very successful. He's done a lot of great work on many different shows. He took over Star Trek Enterprise for season 4, and as Rick Berman and Brandon Braga said in our Enterprise documentaries, yeah, they were joking. They said we only made the first 3 seasons of Enterprise to set up Manny Cotto for season 4. So basically, what Manny Cotto did in season 4 of Enterprise is he went back and did probably what they should have done in the beginning, which is really set the stage, show us the birth, or if not the birth, show us the Star Trek universe, the seeds of the Star Trek universe that we saw in the original series, and then later in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. So after the just abysmally ridiculous first episode of season 4 of Enterprise, they did just that. And season 4 of Enterprise is really, first of all, it's really interesting. They experimented with story arcs, like 2 and 3 episode story arcs, that a lot of them were just terrific. They actually did a sequel to both the Tholian Web and Mirror Mirror in a 2-part episode called In a Mirror Darkly, if you haven't seen that. And while the final episode, which is a Next Generation tie-in of Enterprise, is terrible, the second to the last, Demons and Terra Prime with Peter Weller, are 2 fantastic episodes of Star Trek. So that's what Manny Cotto did for Star Trek. And now my only problem with what Manny Cotto did was it while there was episodes that weren't necessarily self-referential to other Star Trek things, there were things that, like, I really liked The Forge, the 3-part Vulcan storyline. That was great. There's actually a lot of great episodes. There wasn't enough of, I would like to have seen more episodes that dealt with things that weren't necessarily, it was a lot of fan service. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So, but Manny Cotto loved Star Trek, and he did a really good job of tying in Enterprise, and it really felt like the prequel it always wanted to be. But I think what Brandon and Rick Berman wanted to do with Enterprise, and if you watch the Blu-ray documentaries, they're very candid about this. They really wanted to do a show that was more along the lines of, say, The Right Stuff, the movie The Right Stuff, which is the beginnings of the Mercury program, America's space program. They didn't even want to go into space until the final episode. And of course, the network, they had more interference on Enterprise with the network than any of the previous, than Deep Space Nine, Next Gen, and Voyager. They had a lot of network interference, a lot of notes. Famously, one time they got notes saying, well, can you put a new band every week they thought that 10 Forward existed on the NX-01. So the network literally asked them to get a new band, a band they could put on an episode playing in the mess hall every week. I kid you not. But so Manny Cotto did a pretty good job. Look, I don't think what we need is fan service. I mean, if you're going to make what we really want is we want a great Star Trek show. And I think a great Star Trek show, look, Deep Space Nine turned out to be a great Star Trek show, and they did something new. You know, Voyager, even though it tried to escape from its premise, they were doing something really sort of new and unique and interesting. I think a new Star Trek show what it really needs to do is Star Trek needs to do what original Star Trek did. Star Trek was an allegorical action adventure story stories. It was a show that told stories that took problems or concepts of the day, put them through the prism of a science fiction fantasy context, and gave us interesting stories like all science fiction does. We need that. And we're living in a world of where technology is rapidly advancing, all kinds of technology, faster than I think our ability as a people to deal with that. There's so many interesting things they could be doing. I mean, anybody who's read any modern science fiction, you pick up any modern science fiction book, and I'm not talking about a series, but it's something that Stephen Donaldson wrote or Stephen Baxter wrote. Stephen R. Donaldson. No, I didn't mean to say that. I meant to say Stephen Baxter. So I meant to say Stephen Baxter or Peter Hamilton or things like that. Pick up any modern sci-fi. Steve Donaldson, Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. And it's amazing. There's so much great stuff out there. I keep talking about this book that Peter Watts wrote called Blind Sight, which is an amazing book. I'm obsessed with it. That's what we want. You know, we want great allegorical science fiction that's dealing with where we're going into the future, what's happening. I thought that the Section 31 Control, not only was it a ripoff of David Mack's Section 31 novel Control that he got no credit for, but it was such a throwback. It felt like I was watching a Saturday morning, the plot of a Saturday morning TV show from like 1975. Uh-oh, here comes the evil computer AI. We've never seen that before. It was not worthy of Star Trek. It was so like, I mean, how many other shows have done that one better? But yes, so Manny Coto as Star Trek showrunner. Sorry, I know sometimes I lose the plot. I drift off and I don't answer the question. But I think Manny Coto, look, he's done a lot of great, respectable TV work since Enterprise as well. And maybe he could come back. It would be interesting. But you know what I think the problem with a guy like Manny Coto, I guess it's not a problem. They want to do their own thing. You know, it was great when he got on Star Trek. He got to do Star Trek. He sort of, I believe he probably got his Star Trek yayas out. If you could start and create a Star Trek show from scratch, that would be interesting. Maybe he might do that. I'd be curious. I mean, we'll see. Skipnik says, would a recast of the original Star Wars cast be possible for a show concurrent with The Mandalorian to fill in some gaps? Great stuff, by the way. Thanks, man. I guess, you know, I mean, again, my whole thing is I think one of the big problems with the Star Wars universe, and you saw this in the prequels, is like everybody's related to everybody else. What I love about the idea of The Mandalorian is I've loved the Star Wars universe. One of the great things about Star Wars is the universe itself. You know that it's huge, and there's so many people out there, you know, but everything now, let's find out what happened to Han Solo and Ord Mantell and the bounty hunter. Maybe they ran into somebody like the Mandalorian. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing. Is that it just gets tiresome when everything is interrelated. That's why I love the idea of The Mandalorian. You're out in the Outer Rim. You're after Return of the Jedi. The Empire's falling apart. Everything's kind of a mess. I love all that. And you're sort of unfettered. You're unconstrained by, well, I want Luke to show up. You know, why? I think what's great about the Star Wars universe is you can go anywhere and do anything and create anybody. So I'm sure that we're going to see some familiar faces. They're going to do something because they can't resist. But you never know. You never know. But I don't think they should recast the original characters because I hate it. I hate it when we're watching these shows. I mean, now the Star Wars universe, there's a universe. There's going to be a continuity. We're going to be seeing all different kinds of things. We've already seen continuities between the different movies, the different shows, and things like that. They're building a continuity. There's this big continuity. So I don't want to see recasts of anybody. If you recast Princess Leia or Luke and show them to me, I'm like, that's not Luke or Princess Leia. I'd rather see new people, create new characters. You could see R2 and 3PO. You know, I could go for that. Casanova Frankenstein asks, what are my favorite Hitchcock movies? My favorite Hitchcock movie, bar none, is Rear Window. I love Rear Window. I love Rear Window because first of all, I love Jimmy Stewart. And I love that the whole storyline of Rear Window is brilliant. You know, it's like a bottle show of a Star Trek. It's like a bottle episode of Star Trek. It's all in one location. I love the relation. I love Grace Kelly in Rear Window is my favorite female character in any movie ever. I am in love with that character, and I love her to death. And I can't get enough of their relationship, but I can't get mostly enough of her and Raymond Burr and everything that happens. I love Rear Window. It's such a simple story. It's so elegantly made. It's so much fun to watch. It's so entertaining. Rear Window is number one for me. Number two has got to be Vertigo. I'd say Vertigo is probably number two. You know, I love Notorious. I love Rebecca. I love Psycho. But yeah, there's so many good ones. But Rear Window those are my favorite. I mean, Rear Window and Vertigo. Because again, the Jimmy Stewart, you can't go wrong. You cannot go wrong with those films. They're so good. Those movies are so good. Yeah. Willow Yang says, about halfway through season 3 of Next Generation so far. Big thumbs up from her. Well, Willow, you're barreling right into a very famous episode of Star Trek or a very famous episode of Star Trek in general. Can't wait to hear what you think. But isn't it? I mean, one of my favorite. There's so many good. If you're halfway through, you've already watched some of my favorite Star Trek episodes: The Defector, The Survivors. Actually, The Survivors and The Enemy and The Defector are good. But man, I love The Survivors. I love it so much. John Anderson. It's mostly because of John Anderson. You don't understand the scope of my crime. I destroyed all the Husnock everywhere. It gets me every time. I love it. And there's a lot of great episodes in the third season. You don't have to review them all. I'd love to just hear your overview. Can't wait. Mukbang Reviews says, speak to the live chat. We love you, Captain. Talk anything as a pro. Speak well, live chat. Speak anything as a pro. I don't know. Okay, I'll speak to the live chat. I'll see. Hitchcock was a genius. Says, I'll look. I don't look at the live chat anymore. I can't. 27-14 Saints. Keep it up, Seahawks. All right, Donnie. Let's hope the Seahawks win. I don't want to see the Saints. I mean, the Saints are like diminished in capacity. I don't want to see them. What's up? Oh yeah. Mr. Morris says, Carl Morris says, yesterday's Enterprise, one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek ever. I love yesterday's Enterprise. What a shock that was to watch that for the first time. That was an amazing episode of Star Trek. Balance of Terror is great. Yeah, it's great. But I don't know, anything as a pro. I talk anything as a pro. What can I talk? Okay, Mukbang, let's see. I'll tell you something I do. I have an editorial trick. Here's my editorial trick. And it doesn't always work sometimes. So when I'm editing a dialogue scene between two characters talking, let's say they're talking in a room, I usually, when you cut away to another character and the talking is pretty rapid fire, I always lead the dialogue by 2 frames. I allow usually 2 frames of audio come in. So if someone's saying something, and then so you're on the face of one person, and then another person is talking. Suddenly, I usually, and if the cut is normally, I allow, like, depending, before you cut, you have somebody say a word or something. But if they're talking quickly, I'll lead their dialogue by at least 2 frames. Just 2 frames. You hear the sound first before you cut, so it leads you into the cut. I don't know if that's what you wanted, but that's just a trick. It doesn't always work, but when you're cutting, here's what I can't stand. When you're cutting a conversation between 2 people. If you cut one person talking, when they're done talking, you cut to the next person. That way lies death. Don't do that. Alexander Wilson says, what's your opinion on the Thrones prequels about the Targaryens that was greenlit? I hope we get to see a dragon and Aegon fighting. See a dragon on D. And, what do I think of the Targaryen? Look, I'm sure it can be cool, seeing that, but it's, I mean, it could be really interesting, but usually I had the same problem with what they try to do with the Hobbit movies. First of all, I think tonally the Hobbit movies are all over the place, but you've already watched an apocalyptic film about the end of the world in Lord of the Rings. 3 movies, actually. Does that story need to be told? I mean, unless the story is really, really great, unless they've got it beat out and you know where it's going to go, I don't know, man. I mean, look, it could be cool. Look, I hope anything could be cool. Who would have thought Better Call Saul would wind up being as good as it is? What an interesting way to go back and make a sequel or a prequel to a sequel and a prequel to Breaking Bad. I would never have thought that would be the case, but it is, which I think is amazing. So I hope it can. I go into anything that hoping it's going to be great. I hope it's great. Don't you? I hope it's great. I want it to be great. Factual Opinion says, I started watching Enterprise. I'm 8 episodes in. What do you think so far? What do you think 8 episodes into Enterprise? Yeah. It's fun to see the Enterprise crew eager to explore, says Factual Opinion. Yeah. Well, I agree. I liked all those actors a lot. I really like the actors in Enterprise. Some of there's Rick Berman and Brian Braga wrote an inordinate large amount of episodes of that show. I wish they had more. I wish there was a little bit more diversity on the writing staff. One of my favorite episodes of Enterprise is an episode called Cogenitor. What a great Star Trek episode that is. Yeah, when you write more, tell me more. Tell me what's going on. Xenomorph Orthodontist. What a great title. Xenomorph. That's a great name. Xenomorph Orthodontist. Can you imagine? I mean, it's funny. I think about it as two ways. Either you're a xenomorph that's become an orthodontist just because of the kind of teeth you were gifted with, so you were fascinated by other people's chompers, or you're an orthodontist that only works on xenomorphs. I love that name. A xenomorph orthodontist says, I spent 8 years in the service, leaving with an injury and PTSD. AR 588 and Paper Moon helped me steer away from ending my life. Wow. Aaron Eisenberg said other vets said the same. A great actor, and he saved lives. What Xenomorph Orthodontist is talking about is, I believe both of those are 6th season Deep Space Nine episodes. Let me see. Hang on. I'm going to check that out. That's in one of the episodes that he's referring to, Siege of AR. Yeah. Let's see. The Siege of AR 558. No, it's 7. We're talking season 7. I'm wrong. So what Xenomorph Orthodontist? I should know that, by the way. I should have known that, but I'm just thinking 6. In my mind, the 6th Space Nine is the strongest season of modern Star Trek ever. But the Siege of AR 558 and It's Only a Paper Moon are two phenomenal episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine that deal with the costs of war. And Aaron Eisenberg, he suffers greatly. Something, I don't want to ruin it for people like Willow who haven't got there yet, but I know it's years and we're 2 decades away, decades away from those episodes. But Aaron Eisenberg is suffering from PTSD, and he's been severely wounded. And he's questioning his life and questioning his value and questioning everything, and he's suffering. And he is able to, in a very Star Trek way, it's alleviated. So what Xenomorph Orthodontist is referring to is what Star Trek does best. I mean, it speaks to people. And as somebody, by the way, I always say, well, thank you for your service. Like it's become this thing to say. But as people know, I did a medical lecture series with my Mike Schertz, who was also a Special Forces medic, 18 Delta. And he also is an ER doctor. So I've met many people in the service. And it's amazing what our troops have done for people. I have other very good friends that are vets. And it's amazing also how they aren't given the respect that they deserve, certainly by our even government and the healthcare system, the veterans care system. But there's always people working to make it better. But I will say thank you for your service. And I'm sorry you did leave with an injury and that you had PTSD. But again, it speaks volumes about Aaron's performance as Nog and those episodes and the writing staff. I mean, while season 7 of Deep Space Nine is not as good as season 6, it's still an incredible season of Star Trek. And I think the entire Dominion War arc, I mean, when you begin season 5 with Apocalypse Rising, season 5, 6, and 7, amazing Star Trek. So, and Aaron's performance is what makes that. And the Siege of AR 558, man, what amazing episodes of Trek. Amazing episodes of Trek those are. So thank you, Xenomorph Orthodontist. Alexander Wilson says, have you even watched Better Call Saul? Yes, sir. I thought Saul and Mike were not strong enough to build a show around, but Gilligan proved me wrong. Yes, I have. I'm not quite all the way through, but yes. And I'll tell you why. I love the character of Saul, and I love Jonathan Banks because of Wise Guy from the 80s. I love Jonathan Banks. He's so good. But the reason I was inspired to finally dive in, I was going to wait and get the entire series, but it's because I got a 6-scale Saul action figure. I have a really cool, I've got an Ozymandias version of Walter White, so I got Saul. And it was just, I needed something to binge. And it's so good. What I'm surprised about is it's different than I thought it was going to be. It's different, and I like seeing Gus Fring again. Woo-hoo. Man, how cool was it seeing Giancarlo Esposito in the last episode of The Boys? It was great. He just shows up. But yeah, it's so good. Willow Yang says, I loved the reveal at the end of The Survivors. It's one of my favorite things ever. I love that episode. I mean, it's got an interesting mystery, but what I love about that episode so much is and you know, it's funny. One of my favorite things is when you deal with these omnipotent characters and what they're actually capable of, and when they actually use their powers to do something really bad, and the ramifications of that. And boy, does The Survivors get into that. And it is truly like, I love Patrick Stewart's acting at the end of that when he's trying to wrap his head around what he's just been told. It's so great. And John Anderson is one of the greatest guest stars. I mean, John Anderson was in original Twilight Zone episodes, and Jonathan Frakes tells the story when he was in North and South that John Anderson was his, like, they acted together, and he was a big, Jonathan Frakes was a huge fan of John Anderson, who plays the Dowd, Mr. Uxbridge, in that episode, The Survivors. And he tells this great story in our documentaries that John Anderson said, you know, you always have to have a good breakfast. Because when you go into he was saying this, when you go into the factory, you got to stoke the fires. And so Jonathan Frakes told that story to his kids, that you always have to have a good breakfast and stoke the fires. So when you go to the factory, you're ready to go. But yes, Willow, it's so great. That episode, I love that episode so much. And it's underrated. It's underrated because to me, it's a quintessential Star Trek episode, but it doesn't necessarily, it's more of a quiet episode. You know, it's a quiet episode of Star Trek, but it really sneaks up on you. And the ending is just a gut punch when you realize, I mean, if you guys haven't seen The Survivors and you don't know which episode I'm talking about, it's really good. Go back and watch it. Hey, it's Next Generation is only 45 minutes when you watch it streaming. It's like bite size. It's good stuff. I'm a big fan. Let's see. I have a couple of other ones. This one's good. I like this episode. I'm going to read this one. This is a good letter. I love this letter. First of all, I tweeted out there's a great interview with John Williams that CBS did, and they released the full transcript of their interview. It's pretty great. This letter comes from Kenny Crawley Jr. And he says, hello, Robert and Post-Geek Singularity. Today I wanted to talk about film and film soundtracks and scores, why I love them, and why some of the recent modern film soundtracks and scores are not as iconic and great as they used to be. I grew up listening to film soundtracks first with the films themselves and then getting them on CD. For me, some of my favorite composers are John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, James Horner, Alan Silvestri, Danny Elfman, Brian Tyler, Hans Zimmer, etc. Yet, when I listen to modern film scores like some of the Marvel movies, aside from The Avengers and Captain America, the First Avenger, and even some recent DC films like Man of Steel, they are not as iconic and memorable and film soundtracks and scores like the past were. Sure, I love The Avengers, Captain America, and Wonder Woman scores, but other than those scores, nothing of more recent times that I can say, yay, that was really great. Do today's modern film scores lack the iconic nature that scores of the past, like Star Wars, Close Encounters, Superman, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Jurassic Park, etc., way back when? I think in some cases, yes, but in other cases, no. For me, it's about 50-50. Some newer film scores and soundtracks are amazing, and some just lack the iconic nature of film scores of the past. Thanks, Robert, and keep up the great work. Sincerely, longtime listener and geek, Kenny K. Well, Kenny, what's really interesting is one of my good buddies, Lucas Kendall, who I made Skyfighter with, obviously had his film score monthly label where he published a lot of soundtrack albums. And we talked a lot about this. And I've talked a lot about film stuff with Lucas. And he was telling me, we talked about this very subject. And he was saying old school composers like John Williams and Jerry Goldsmith, they literally wrote down their scores. And in John Williams' latest interview with CBS, which you can find on my Twitter feed, you can follow me. If you don't follow me on Twitter, it's Burnett RM, BURNETTRM, at Burnett RM. I tweeted this. It's a print version of the interview. It just goes into longer things. And John Williams talks about how he sits and writes his scores out. And I think when you're writing your scores out, it's just a different methodology. A lot of people that came up now with the technology that exists are used to just creating their scores by ear. They're playing by ear and they're creating these things. Whereas, the writers of yore, the composers of yore, were, when you're writing out your music, you're literally, I think, now far be it, I'm not a musician. I do not know anything about film composing, so I'm telling you this. I am talking completely out of my ass. But I would assume that when you know how to read and write music, and you can literally hear what it's going to be, it's like being a writer. When you sit down and write something, if you're Willow Yang, for instance, and you write well, she probably goes back and changes things around or moves stuff around, but she's writing on paper so she can see what she's doing. John Williams is hearing things in his head. He's coming up with them internally because he really understands music. He's not working, he's not playing things and trying to come up with something. And I think a lot of the old school composers, that's how they created music. And I think inherently, probably writing that way leads to more thematic music, leads to coming up with, because you literally can see it. You're not coming up with it. You're hearing these things in your mind and you're actually writing them down. I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like to know how to write music on a page, because you have to be able to hear it and understand it and really understand how an orchestra works. And I think that's really probably why we don't have a lot of the iconic film scores, because I don't think there is something to be said for understanding the rules of something. Like, if you're a great writer, Strunk and White's elements of style. And once you understand intrinsically all of those things, you understand all the rules of writing, you can break them, you can do whatever you want, but you really understand writing. Anybody can sit down and start spewing on a page. Now you can just dictate into your phone and then it gets translated. But to really understand the mechanics of music, I can only imagine that somebody who knows how to write like John Williams can write these more iconic scores. I don't think younger composers, a lot of them are that gifted, have those skills. That's what I think the difference is. It's just a discipline thing. And I agree. And I also think that, I hate to say it, I like a lot of the soundscapes. I mean, I look at what Hans Zimmer or James Newton Howard did or things like that. Hans Zimmer, I love that iconic theme he came up with for Man of Steel. I thought that was beautiful. But, his scores, a lot of them, I love his Inception score. But there's a lot more scores today are more like soundscapes, as opposed to, I'll tell you something really interesting. Speaking that we were talking about Star Trek, classic Star Trek music from the original series, I think, is amazing. I've loved it so much. But when they started doing Next Generation, there's a lot of wallpapery noise. Rick Berman especially did not like music with strong thematic elements. He liked much more of a kind of a droning wallpaper. And Ron Jones, who's by far my favorite Next Generation composer, who worked on the show up through the 4th season, he wrote the score for The Best of Both Worlds. He was really bringing in those thematic elements, and they didn't like that. And I think stylistically, we sort of, as moviegoers and certainly as filmmakers, people, modern filmmakers aren't so down with those iconic themes. I mean, you watch, I think it's a piece of music on the Jaws soundtrack called The Menu. Dun, 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 dun. And then all these pieces of music come in, and it's this light, bouncy feeling when everybody's arriving for the 4th of July. I mean, I don't know if you'd ever get that today. I mean, it's John Williams, but I don't know if anybody would want that kind of a piece of music. It's delightful. I just think movies' tastes have changed, but I agree with you. There's not a lot of, when I think about soundtracks, I mean, one of my favorite soundtracks of the last 20 years is for Never Let Me Go, the movie Never Let Me Go, which I think is one of the most devastating science fiction movies. People well, it's not really a science fiction movie. Yeah, it is. It's the best kind of science fiction movie. To my mind, a 1-2 punch is Children of Men and Never Let Me Go. And Never Let Me Go is one of the great scores I think of the modern age. So good. But yeah, I agree with you. I mean, the scores aren't as iconic. And because they're not as iconic, I don't think people grow up. When I was a kid, when I was, 10 years old, I had the score for Logan's Run, I had the score for Star Wars, I had the score for Capricorn 1 and Jaws, and I was listening to film music, and film music was much more evocative. Like, you'd listen to it and you really knew, like, you knew where you were in the movie when you listen to those records. And I grew up collecting soundtracks, and I just don't. There's not a lot of soundtracks that I buy anymore, because when it's more wallpaper, but I do like the score for, like, Inception. You know what score I really liked, actually, that I play a lot, is the score for Fury Road, the Junkie XL score. It's the best driving music. It's also very good skiing music if you like to ski. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think music is nearly as iconic as it used to be, unfortunately, which is kind of a bummer. Let's see. Oh, Alexander Wilson says, since you've seen Better Call Saul, no, I haven't seen all of it. What's your opinion on Chuck? Chuck, I thought his character was fascinating. He wasn't wrong. No, he wasn't wrong, was he? I have to contemplate that. I don't think he was wrong. Interesting. I have to ponder that. I'm not done with Better Call Saul either. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you where I'm at. I'll tell you where I'm at in Better Call Saul. I can't go. I have to look. But Chuck, what's interesting is, what's his name? Spinal Tap. Why am I drawing a blank? Michael McKean. That guy is, he's such a great actor. I mean, I might, that's probably, I think that might be his best role. I think, maybe. I don't think he works enough. And I'll tell you one thing though, but every time I see him, I'm like, I'm reminded he's old. I saw a picture of him. I just saw an interview with him. Where was it? And, yeah, I like Michael McKean. Yeah, it's good stuff. I don't know where we're on Better Call Saul. It's the 4th season. Is it the 4th season now? I think. Yeah, I don't know what episode I'm on, but Chuck, yeah. Let's see what, I think it's been 2 hours. It's been 2 hours. You ready? I don't like to lose. I think I'm going to end this chat. I'm going to end this chat now, and I'm going to end this chat. But before I end this chat, we got to check in on the Seahawks. Oh God, it's 33-14 with 4 minutes left in the game. Ouch! I don't know what happened. Perhaps it's better I've been here with you talking. Well, anyway, folks, I want to thank all my moderators. I want to thank the Sheriff of Nottingham, Terry, who's actually in Nottingham. I want to thank Detective Jim, who is going to see Ad Astra. I want to say thank you to Greg Smith for building houses and building a 1-to-1 scale snowspeeder. And of course, the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank everybody that supports the channel generously through super chats and through joining the Post-Geek Singularity on the website. I want to thank everybody that sends in letters. I'm trying to get to all of them. We're getting in a lot. I'll be back on the John Campea show tomorrow at 9. And I keep reminding people, because people keep asking me, I didn't put the link today. Yes, you can go to the TeePublic, or wait a minute, I guess I can get to the TeePublic thing here. People are always asking me about the shirts now, because I wore my Robservations shirt. And it's funny because I didn't think about that, about that, but indeed, they're having a sale. So if you want to get a shirt, and you can, let's see, I will get the link. Oh, here we go. And I'm going to put new shirts up. I'm going to do an Imagination Connoisseur shirt, actually, that has artwork that Elizabeth painted. So that'll be cool. But if you want to go, the shirts are cheap. They're like 35% off. So yeah, I'll send you. Here's a link. Here's a link to the shirts. So if you want, I'll throw it in there. But yeah, so I want to thank everybody and being here on Sunday. It's a bummer what's happening with the Seahawks, but what can I say? Yeah, now they've been distracted. And somebody's beeping outside. But I want to thank all of you for the generous support of the channel. It's great. And the letters are great. You guys keep sending in the letters. Keep going to the website, Burnettwork.net. I love getting letters. I love getting all kinds of things from you. And we're going to be doing an unboxing video. People who've sent me things to the P.O. Box in Iowa, I'm going to get them and do a live unboxing probably on Friday. I'm looking forward to them because like Lynn Hobday sent me something from Japan, which I can't wait to see what that is. Mike is leaving on Wednesday. So, yeah. But anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for being you. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I'm going to bid you all farewell. I'm going to say, have a better day.